Bureau Chief for Public Transportation at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. And I'd like to welcome you to Along the Lines, a podcast series where we'll share exciting news and updates and explore current issues and ideas on Connecticut's public transportation system. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Along the Lines. I'm your host, Ben Limmer. The Connecticut Department of Transportation has recently announced many exciting projects in our quest to make our public transit system best in class. These projects are vital in reshaping communities as well as the local and state economy. They will also help improve air quality and make our system more equitable and sustainable for a brighter future for all. These projects, of course, need funding to make them a reality. So today we'll talk about where this funding comes from, and we'll talk about some of the challenges we face, as well as provide a national perspective, as most, if not all, states face similar challenges. So joining me today is Sharon Greene, Managing Principal at InfraStrategies, a U.S.-based consultancy focused on developing, funding, financing, and managing large infrastructure programs, as well as Gary Pescosolido, Bureau Chief of Finance and Administration at the Connecticut Department of Transportation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for your time. All right, Gary, so starting with you. Now, I admit this is not the easiest topic to touch upon in a 20-minute podcast or cover in 20 minutes. Can you give our listeners a brief introduction to Connecticut's primary transportation fund? It's called the Special Transportation Fund.
Sure. So there's a little history that goes on with the STF. The Special Transportation Fund here in the state of Connecticut is a special fund exclusively for transportation purposes. It is now a lockbox. In 2018, the state constitution was amended with an 88% approval of the general population who voted in the election on November 6th. And it shall remain a perpetual fund, and the resources of this fund can only be expended for transportation purposes, which also includes our debt service on our special tax obligation bonds. But it is kind of unique in the fact that, we have this special fund exclusively for transportation purposes here in the state of Connecticut, and that prevents the ability of our projects and programs, being sustainable. We can be sustainable with this, knowing we have, fixed revenue sources and a long-term program of funding coming in to support all the activities we need to going along. So this fund also operates along with the Department of Transportation, the Department of Motor Vehicles, as well as some other operational expenditures from other consolidated functions that we have, such as human resources, where we actually do pay for other services to other state agencies, but strictly for our transportation purposes. So though STF is specific to our revenue sources and where they go, and their appropriated expenditures that are authorized in legislation by the Connecticut General Assembly, the STF is only a component of our overall funding here that we manage at DOT. So along with the STF, we need to consider that we have federal funds, state special tax obligation bonds that are also in our mix for our programming. And the STF comprises of about $2 billion annually of revenue and expenditure that we take in and operate. We also utilize in excess of $1 billion of STO bonds annually, and also another $1 billion plus in federal formula funds. And those federal formula funds are also added to with discretionary federal funds. And on average, we get a couple of $100 million a year there. We're very successful in those operations of getting the federal funds on discretionary programs, as well as very large special programs, such as the FRA NEC, Northeast Corridor Federal State Partnership, which we just received another $1.3 billion for major infrastructure projects on our rail lines. So all told, we program well over $3 billion annually between our operating and capital programs. But the STF is the heartbeat of that, allows us to pay our debt, pay our operations, and what we do. And just, quickly, I will say that, keeping in mind that The State Department of Transportation here in Connecticut is a multimodal DOT. So we not only oversee all this public transportation needs for rail and bus, but we also operate all of our highway operations. So snow removal, highway maintenance, and all of that is still all covered for 3,500 lane miles of roadways in the state of Connecticut. In addition to that, we have our engineering construction office, which does all of our construction and design work for all of our projects on roads and bridges, including public transportation, and policy and planning, which does a huge amount of work in getting all of that stuff ready in the planning phases for our construction jobs, as well as the Bureau of Public Transportation, which you're familiar with, Ben. But yeah, and that's the gist of it. But the STF is the heartbeat of our whole program.
So, Gary, follow-up question. You talked about where the money goes. Where does the Special Transportation Fund come from?
So the STF, that $2 billion that we take in here that operates our budget, which is over 50% of that, just in our operating, along with fringe benefits to all of our employees, as well as the debt service on our STO bonds. That $2 billion breaks out a couple of different ways. We have several different resources of revenue that come into the fund. The largest single source at this point is sales and use tax, which is about $840 million a year. That is the sales and use tax that's imposed under certain general statutes, which include sales tax on motor vehicles. Oil companies tax, which is like a gross receipts tax, is an 8.1% tax on the gross earnings from petroleum sales. That's about $390 million a year. We have motor fuels gas tax, which is about $265 million a year. And that's all the distributors. Everybody who pumps at a gas pump would be paying right now, it's 25 cents a gallon, which is pretty reasonable compared to the rest of the country. Now, we have other states that far exceed that. And we receive that in our fund. We have motor vehicle receipts of 254, which are the specific registration and operator license fees that are collected at motor vehicles. Another 126 million license and permits and fees. There's other special sales tax that's collected at DMV on other vehicles that aren't necessarily motor vehicles, but vessels, snowmobiles, aircraft, and such. We have a highway use fee that was just installed, which is currently this year only projected at 30 million as a startup year, but is expected to bring in about 90 million a year. And that's every carrier operating heavy trucks or multi-unit motor vehicles on any highway in the state pays into that on a per mile type fee, but it is a highway use fee. And also another about $82 million that we book as interest that comes in through some Buy America, Build America bond subsidy receipts and such. But overall, that's the revenue sources of the fund that make up the $2 billion a year.
Great. Sharon, thanks again for being here today. First of all, you do have the distinction of being the very first Hall of Famer to appear on this podcast. You were, of course, inducted to the American Public Transportation Association Hall of Fame in 2023. So huge congratulations to
Thank
you.
You, Ben. Thank
Absolutely. Many government agencies are looking at what some are calling the fiscal cliff, where there are significant gaps in expenses and revenues in the near future due to a variety of factors. Across the country, what are some novel ideas that you've seen in other states that they have used to successfully navigate these challenges?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't call it a fiscal cliff. I think of it as the new reality because this is the future. This is what we face. It's going to be a challenge for how to address it, how to recover the lost riders and revenues as a result of COVID. And that hit certain areas of the country more heavily than others. Connecticut is fortunate. You have a number of different taxes that go into comprising the STF. But what I didn't hear from Gary was how much of this is dedicated to transit and how much of it is dedicated to transit capital versus operations. And so this is something that faces agencies across the country. Agencies that have a cliff are looking not just at what they themselves can do to raise revenue, and some of them have had very substantial drops in ridership and revenue, from which the recovery period will be very long. And so they're looking at solutions that will help them gain riders and not lose riders. And so raising fares might be part of a picture, but it has to be viewed against the potential to work against the ridership increase and making the best case for transit and the role it can play. The other thing that agencies across the country are doing is they're looking to their states to help them in the interim. And states like California, for example, are looking at right now, they've set up a special task force across the state to look at all of those individual pots that contribute to the state's revenues and looking at what opportunities there are to increase some of them, to change the flexibility, to use certain of them for transit as opposed to highways, to make them more multimodally friendly, and to increase the levels or the rates of taxation on certain items. This will be a challenge because these are issues that go before the state legislatures for approval, and you need a very supportive state legislature that's supportive of transit in order to make that happen. Other areas are looking at the state's solution as a temporary solution, but it's going to be a timely solution that maybe it can accommodate a gap in 24 and 25, but regions are looking then at what they can do to raise money regionally. And so you're looking at the opportunity for regional taxes or local taxes. And one thing that's happening is to change the percentage that's required for passage of a measure from in California and some other places. You need a 2/3 vote to pass things, to make it a 55% or bring it down to make measures easier to pass. So it's a long answer to the question, but it isn't a simple question.
Gary, pivoting back to you, speaking of the operating budget as it relates to the Connecticut DOT, could you talk about how it's created, submitted, approved, just high level? What's that process look like?
Sure. I'm going to try to get a couple pieces in because I would also like to comment on Sharon's statement, and I agree with her 100%. But first of all, the Connecticut DOT operating budget is created on a biennial basis. So here at the agency, we have a very robust plan that starts off in August of a pre-year, the pre-budget year. We collect all the information, compile it into the budget proposal. The budget proposal sent through OPM to the governor's office, which is the Office of Policy and Management. Office of Policy and Management is the budget office of the governor. The governor then will look at the budget and include our recommendations or not into the budget package that he gives to the legislature. The legislature will then approve that budget and or change it and give us a 2-year budget looking out and fund us. And long story short is that we have all of our accounts that we look at and all of our needs looking forward are all analyzed and included in that request that we make in the initial year for that 2-year budget looking forward. To that end, Sharon's absolutely right. That not cliff that we talk about all the time is a reality for a lot of states, and we have a great plan going forward on that. Part of that is that budget process. In that budget process, we are expecting that next August, we're going to see some significant change, either in the subsidy component of our biennial budget request that is going to address that, and either the legislature will say yes or no and may cause an action to occur, which could be any other thing, right? So subsidy is the amount that the state funds to operate all of our public transit, train, rail, and bus. So our public transportation systems are funded through that DOT budget. And it's just, the percentage, about 50% of our $900 million is more than 50% is actually dedicated to public transportation subsidy. So we pay roughly $250 million a year. It's higher and lower on both sides, but about $250 million a year in subsidy for bus and rail in the state of Connecticut's budget here to support that activity. Bus has a different percentage than it is of support. It's probably closer to 85% of the bus system is subsidized, but probably on the main line, which is our New Haven line or Metro North Railroad, is probably closer to 65% is funded by Connecticut subsidy payment, which means that we have a higher fare box collection rate on the Metro North Railroad than we do in the transit system and the bus system. However, we'll say that we have 3 rail systems that we actually do operate under those funds, and one of them is the Metro North Railroad, the New Haven line, which goes from New Haven to New York. We have the Hartford line, which actually goes from Springfield to New Haven, and then also Shoreline East, which goes from New London to New Haven. So And they're all kind of independent in their own way. They're successful, in certain areas that they operate. But long and short of it is, there's a huge amount of investment that goes into that subsidy from Connecticut's budget perspective. On top of that, our input to the capital side exceeds 50% of our total capital budget on transit, because a lot of our infrastructure on our rail lines is very old. So especially rail bridges. Right now, we have almost a $2 billion collective job, which is going to be all the surrounding projects around the current Walk Bridge, which will exceed $2 billion when it's done. That broke ground back in April. And so you can imagine that when we have those levels of costs on those things, it kind of dwarfs some of the roadway costs that we have for construction on roads or redoing roadways. And that's sometimes a point of pain here, but we have to balance that out. And being a multimodal agency, we're able to talk to each other closely to handle that at the executive level, to make sure we have the right resources going to the right needs across the agency and across the state of Connecticut, so we can provide the best services for the best money for all the taxpayers.
Yeah, you bet. So, Sharon, back to you. The Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs
Yeah.
Act has,
Yes.
frankly, invested billions of dollars throughout the country in transportation and infrastructure improvements. That's a huge challenge, but huge opportunity. Given your national work that you do, what are some unforeseen challenges that you've seen pop up?
Well, one thing, I have to start with congratulating you, Ben, and the department for the tremendous success rate you have had in terms of obtaining FTA and FRA funding under the IIJA programs. And you have that tremendous backlog that Gary discussed, and that has been recognized. You are telling the story, which is a very, very important part of the process, to make sure that the federal agencies understand what the need is, that they understand not just a benefit cost ratio, which they require on these projects, but they truly understand the role that these projects play in the health not only of the state, the localities, but the region as a whole. The whole Northeast Corridor benefits from Connecticut's success. And I think that that's very important. Other agencies have more challenges than you have. They see a lot of funds. They don't know how to prioritize the needs for grants, and they have a lot of demand, but they have a lot of need, but they don't necessarily have matching funds, or they have to prioritize the matching funds and be very careful as to how they choose what they pursue. I think that this administration has a real challenge to make sure that the money goes out and that it makes the case for why investment is needed. And we're facing an oncoming presidential election. Every year makes it more difficult if we haven't made the case for how we've delivered on the money that's there. And I think that that's a very important part of it. But being grant ready, being project delivery ready, and having good projects and making the case and telling the story is all very important.
Speaking of being ready, Connecticut does have some of the oldest rail infrastructure in the whole country. The fact that this infrastructure is also located in very populated areas presents a huge challenge that we're all working through. How important is the continued modernization of our public transportation system to the state as well as the region and then throughout the country?
If that's a question you're directing to me, I think it's essential. It is absolutely essential. The only way, a very important part, I won't say the only way, but a very important part of making the case for funding is to demonstrate that you provide good service. And you can provide reliable service if your capital plant is old, if equipment is breaking down, if your on-time performance and service record is poor. I think you have to demonstrate the need for this infrastructure and to keep it in a state of good repair. Bring it up to a state of good repair first.
You bet. Gary, back to you. Something that you touched on earlier, but we're just going to dig a little bit deeper. What's the situation at the Connecticut DOT with regards to the appropriated funding for bus and rail services? You touched on it high level, but just take it a little further.
We have a pretty robust look at this every year, obviously, and it's an ongoing look constantly. So Basically, the appropriated funding for bus and rail services, we have two separate accounts that we do manage for that. And as I said, they're pushing $250 million apiece. We know that with ridership coming back on bus, that we're in fairly good shape on the bus side of the house. With rail, it's been a little slower comeback since COVID. And so the appropriated funds we look on the rail side are going to be a little bit more challenging to be able to get enough funding in place on the subsidy side here in our budget to be able to support the level of service that we currently enjoy. However, we have been very fortunate with COVID relief funds to be able to program those funds out accordingly for lost fare box revenue from the beginning. And we have taken a very proactive stance on that, going long to be able to carry out through 2025, which would be, all the way into almost 26, to be able to support short fare box in rail to support the full 100% service levels that we need. But we have to be conscious that we need to look at what those services are that we are providing to make sure that they're efficient and that we're doing the right thing on those rail lines, and either increasing service where we need to and or cutting back on the services that aren't successful. But mainly, the appropriated funding is going to be something the legislature ultimately determines on of how much we're going to be able to afford in the budget. And then we will act from there about what levels of service we need to have or other potential increases in fares or other things that could offset that.
Thank you. And Sharon, what are you seeing nationally with both capital as well as operating funding? Any key takeaways that we could consider locally?
I think that one thing is to build on what Gary just said in terms of looking at how to reassess what the service is that is being put out to use it most efficiently. If you cannot get additional operating subsidy after the COVID relief funds run out, and in most places that's expiring in 2025, and there's pressure to use it or lose it because Congress has its eye on unexpended COVID relief funds. But I think agencies are looking at re-examining the ridership patterns and the needs of riders, reconfiguring service. On the passenger rail side, it's looking at when riders are in need of the service. It's not the traditional pattern of peak service that there was before, going from a lot of home to work trips. These are changing ridership patterns that have to be addressed by how service is configured. And I think the same thing exists on the bus side. So that's what's happening mainly on the operating side, making adjustments in service to accommodate the new ridership patterns. On the capital side, it's less of an issue. The issue is finding match. And most places have an easier time on finding capital because the capital programs right now are very generous.
Yeah, okay. I would like to thank you both for coming. Thanking today's guests, of course, Sharon Greene and Gary Pescosolido, for being on the podcast today and for this very informative and timely conversation. While we are laser focused on continued improvement and modernization of Connecticut's vast network of public transportation services, we also, of course, must be mindful of the challenges that we face with the Connecticut Special Transportation Fund. Of course, continue to seek federal grants and awards and be creative as we mitigate for the expected shortfall in these funds. But the good news is that we at the DOT are ready for the challenge and will continue to improve all of our customers' experiences throughout all of the services that we offer throughout the state. So once again, I'm Ben Limmer. Join us next time for another episode of Along the Lines. Thanks for listening to this episode of Along the Lines. This is your host, Benjamin Limmer. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please remember to subscribe and share.